Hello and welcome to the Speaking Body Podcast. I'm your host, Neil Gorman. Today's episode of the podcast is going to be another short episode, a solo episode of just me talking directly to you about an idea that I've had that really builds a lot on the content that I put forward in our previous episode. And so what I want to do is very briefly return to that content and do a very short review of it. In that episode, I made a couple of different claims. I'm going to lay them out in a somewhat chronological way here. Claim number one is that psychoanalysis is an extremely unique clinical practice. Claim number two kind of gets into what makes it unique. And that claim was that psychoanalysts are people who, when they encounter a patient, assuming that the psychoanalyst knows things about them, about their unconscious in particular, about their symptoms, so on and so forth. If the patient is assuming that the analyst knows all that stuff, they are also, at the same time that they're making that supposition, giving the person who's in the position of the psychoanalyst a lot of power and authority. And I think that psychoanalysis is a practice that demands that an analyst, somebody who's practicing psychoanalysis, does not take up that supposition of knowledge, does not take up that authority and knowledge either. When somebody's acting as an analyst, what they're doing, I think, is they're allowing their patient to make that supposition. They don't stop them from making it, but they don't take it up. They don't go, yes, you are correct to assume that I know all these things that you think I know. What they do instead is take up a position based on their lack of knowledge. There's this saying from Lacan about love, and I'm going to translate it from French here into English. Love is giving that which you do not have to somebody who does not want it. Now, I think that that aphorism is something that applies not only to love, but to a clinical practice of psychoanalysis as well. I think that in clinical psychoanalysis, what an analyst does is they give their patients their lack, which is kind of a weird idea. What I mean by that is that when the patient comes and assumes that the analyst knows something, the analyst does not confirm that supposition. What they do instead is offer the patient their curiosity. Curiosity is something that comes from a lack of knowledge. So when you're offering your patient curiosity, what you're offering them is what you don't know, your lack of knowledge. And so you're giving your patient, in a way, that which you lack. And a lot of times, not every time, the patient isn't always going to like that. That is not going to be what they want, but that is what happens within an experience of psychoanalysis. So that's my review of the content from the previous episode. Let's move into the content for today's episode. Here's the thing that I want to put forward today. The way that I'm describing a psychoanalyst works, the way that I'm saying clinical psychoanalysis works, is not something that is totally unique to psychoanalysis in and of itself. I do think that it is unique to psychoanalysis within the psychotherapeutic marketplace here in the United States where I practice. I say that because it seems to me that most other forms of psychotherapy that are practiced in the United States are predicated under the idea that the therapist or mental health professional does in fact know things that their patients don't. And many mental health professionals, I think, are trying to offer their patients something. They're trying to give them something. They're trying to give them knowledge. They're trying to teach them skills. They're trying to, I'm using my fingers to do air quotes here, give them tools for their toolbox. Psychoanalysis does not do those things, because if you're doing all those things, you are going with the supposition of knowledge. The patient thinks that you have the tools for the toolbox. The patient thinks that you know things that they don't. The patient thinks that you can teach them things and stuff. And then if the mental health expert actually goes along with that and says, yes, I will offer you the tools, I will try to teach you the skills, I will tell you things that I know, that's going with it. And I think that's by far the norm within most psychotherapies in the United States today. Psychoanalysis is pretty unique in the fact that it does not do that. It goes, nope. It doesn't stop, like I said, the person from making that supposition, because you can't stop people from assuming things or supposing things, but it doesn't take that up. So I think it is unique within that psychotherapeutic marketplace, but I don't think that it's unique to psychoanalysis, period, full stop. When I was thinking about this after making the last episode that I made, I was trying to think about other things that function in this way. and I came up with two things that I think function in this way. The first one is science. Now, that might sound a little bit weird to some people, so hear me out on this. I am not a trained scientist, so what I'm saying, please bear that in mind as I say all this stuff. The way that I think that science works is that scientists know a bunch of stuff about something. It could be physics or chemistry or biology or some other area. And then they do these scientific experiments. But the thing about the experiments that they do is that these experiments are not actually an attempt to prove what they already know. What these experiments are, I believe, is an attempt to answer a question that they don't actually know the answer to. That's what I think scientists are doing when they're doing science. So, for example, a scientist might want to know what happens if I give this substance to mice and then have mice run through a maze. They actually don't know what is going to happen when they do that. They don't know if the substance is going to make the mice get through the maze faster or slower or have no effect at all. And so they run the experiment and then they observe what happens. And they go, okay, I've learned something here. The substance in this example, let's just say it had no effect at all, right? It didn't make the mice run faster or slower. So they have the mice go through a maze. They time the mice. They get an idea of how long it takes a mice to go through the maze on average. Then they give a group of mice this substance and they have those mice run through the same maze and it's exactly the same, right? It doesn't change anything. They go, okay, we've learned that this substance doesn't seem to have any impact on mice running through maze. We've learned something. Then another scientist in a different location could run the exact same experiment. Now, when they run the experiment the second time, it might look as if what they are doing is trying to prove that this substance has no effect on mice's ability to run through a maze. But that's not actually what they're doing. What they're doing is they're trying to answer a new question, which is this replicatable? Is what happened the first time we run this experiment a fluke? Or is that something that we can replicate and make it happen again? Now, if it is replicated, they go, okay, we've learned that we've now done this twice. That's 2 data points. Let's have somebody do it a third time and let's see what happens. Oh, the third time, it's the same thing again. Okay, we've learned something that this substance probably is not having much of an effect on this. But sometimes what happens is they might run it once, no effect, run it twice, no effect, run it a third time. Oh, there is an effect. Ooh, what happened there? A whole new set of questions opened up. Why the third time did it seem to have an effect, but in the first 2 times it didn't? This is very similar to psychoanalysis. When you're listening to a patient tell you things and you're an analyst, you're going to learn stuff and you're going to make connections. You might offer an interpretation to the patient and you'll see what happens when you do that. But when this is working well, the interpretations that we offer are not some kind of final answer that unlocks the mystery of life. They're things that might create a new kind of connection, a new form of knowledge, but that new form of knowledge leads to even more questions. So in this respect, I think that science and the clinical practice of psychoanalysis operate in a very similar way. I would go so far as to say that they share a similar ethic to one another. Another thing that operates this way is the practice of ethnography. Ethnography is a qualitative research methodology where a researcher goes into a place that is unfamiliar to them and they watch what happens in that area. They have lots of questions about what they can learn as a result of going to this place and watching how people do things. Now, ethnographers can go to lots of different places. I'll use the United States as an example here. I live in the Chicagoland area. I'm pretty used to the Chicagoland area. I understand how people think and feel about a variety of things, generally speaking, in the Chicagoland area. Now, if I were to go to a bar in Texas and started to watch how people conducted themselves there, there would be some differences between what I'm used to and this place that's new to me in Texas. And I could, if I was an ethnographer, be like, ooh, I wonder what I can learn about how people live by paying really close attention to and being very curious about what happens in this bar in Texas. It doesn't have to be something like that, it could also be going to a radically different place. I could go to a location where the culture is super different, the language is different, the food is going to be super different, so on and so forth. So if I were to leave the Chicagoland area and travel to like rural China, there would probably be a lot of differences between what I was used to here in Chicagoland, certainly more than if I were to leave here and go to Texas. But in both cases, if I'm going to Texas or rural China, if I am being an ethnographer, I'm not going into these places saying, I know about this bar in Texas. I know about rural China. What I am doing is I'm thinking to myself, what can I learn about this bar in Texas? What can I learn about rural China and how people live there? So ethnographers, like psychoanalysts, are people who, this is my claim, take up a position of not knowing about the place that they're going to, not knowing about the people there, not knowing about what's natural or normal in these places, not knowing what's taboo and forbidden. They go to those places and they try to learn these things. And also, like psychoanalysis and also like scientists, this is not from a place of judgment. They don't observe and necessarily then go, okay, what I'm seeing here, this is right, this is wrong, this is ugly, this is beautiful. That's not what they're doing. They're trying to learn. They're really curious people who want to understand something about this place that is to some degree a foreign place to them. I think that scientists, when they run scientific experiments, a lot of times what they're doing is they're just trying to find things out. They're not trying to find things out and then use what they find out to make some kind of moralistic claim about what they've learned. They're just trying to learn. And I really do think that you can see, if you look across these three things that I'm trying to describe to you here today, science, ethnography, and psychoanalysis, that there is this very similar ethic that connects these things. Now, of course, yes, there are obvious differences between these as well. They are not the same thing. And I hope that you don't think that what I'm saying is that psychoanalysis and science and ethnography are really the same thing. I am not saying that. They are different, very different in some very important ways. But I do think that there is an ethic that connects these things. If you think that that's an interesting idea, that's nice. If you think that's a stupid idea, that's also nice. I would like to hear from anybody who wants to react to this in any way. If you want to get in touch with me and let me know what you think about any of these ideas, you can do so by going over to speakingbody.substack.com. That's the website for this podcast. There you're going to find all sorts of different ways that you can get in touch with me and share your thoughts, your reactions, your ideas, your critiques, your challenges, all that sort of stuff. But let me bounce back to this idea of ethnography here for just a moment here and make a reference. There's a guy who does some really interesting work that I'm a huge fan of. This guy's name is Chris Arnade. He also happens to have a Substack, which is called Chris Arnade Walks the World. And he calls himself a pop ethnographer, which I think is a cool idea. And he goes all over to different places. He has gone places all over the world, places that are so radically different from the places that he grew up in. And what he does whenever he goes to these places is take up this ethic that I'm trying to describe to you. He goes, look, I am a visitor here. There's so much that I don't know about this place. There's so much that I don't know about the people who live in this place. I am really super interested in trying to figure out what it is that I can learn from these people. He's not interested in going into these different places and identifying something and being like, that thing that they're doing over there, that's crazy. That's stupid. That's messed up. He doesn't do that. Sometimes he sees those things and he might have that sort of knee-jerk reaction to it internally, but I think he's pretty good at putting that off to the side and going like, well, maybe there's actually a reason why people are doing those things that I think are crazy or weird. Maybe I could ask them why they're doing them and maybe they'll tell me. And so he does. He goes places and he walks around and he tries to figure out why it is that people are doing the things that they're doing, why they are making the choices they are making, why they have the beliefs that they have. And it's a really, really fascinating thing. And I just adore the way that Chris Arnade shares the work that he's doing through his Substack. If it's something that you have not checked out, I would certainly urge you to check it out because I think it will be well worth your time. Anyways, in one of his recent newsletters, and I'll link back to this in the show notes for this episode of Speaking Body, he made a distinction between what he's calling thick culture and thin culture. And he said, thick culture is the plot that we follow, while thin culture is the stage settings. I want to take that and redescribe it to you in a more psychoanalytic way. I believe that the unconscious is the plot that we follow, while the way that we consciously go about it is the stage settings. And this is something that I just thought was interesting because it showed the way that a pop ethnographer said something that I thought could be very easily restated in a more psychoanalytic way. Okay, I think I've laid out this idea. Hopefully I've laid it out in a way that actually makes sense to you, that makes sense outside of my brain. And if I've done that, that's great. I'm very interested in hearing from you, the audience of this podcast. If there's anything that you want to share with me in reaction to this episode or previous episodes of this podcast, I would truly appreciate hearing from you. And as always, I want to end this podcast by saying that there is just so many things that you could give your time and your attention to. So many things in the world, so many podcasts, so many YouTube videos, so many baseball games, so on and so forth. I sincerely appreciate the fact that you've given me your time and attention for the duration of this podcast. If you want to support the podcast, you could tell other people about the podcast. That would be really great, because if you find this podcast interesting, the people who you know and who are of the same ilk as you will also probably find it interesting. And if you give it a review and a star rating in whatever application you use to listen to the podcast, that helps too. So if you're willing to do any of those things, I would greatly appreciate that. Having said all this stuff, I'm going to be done here for today. Till the next time I'm in your ears, you all take care.